Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into some really crucial topics that show just how connected everything is, from global power shifts right down to, well, the things we consume every day. Let's kick things off with India's foreign policy. We've got this source here, an editorial quoting M.K. Narayanan, a former national security advisor. He uses some strong language, talking about an existential crisis for India in a perilous world. He really stresses the need to read the tea leaves well.
Yes, it's quite a stark assessment. And the source lays out several wake-up calls for India. One big one is the possibility of Trump returning to office, his Make America Great Again or Maggie policies. They've already started affecting India in ways beyond just trade disputes.
Right, it's not just about tariffs anymore.
Exactly. And then there's the fallout from the recent India-Pakistan conflict. The article goes into details about China's military support for Pakistan equipment transfers, things like that. It really paints a picture of a deep China-Pakistan nexus that, well, India just can't ignore.
That's a major dynamic right there in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But the article also looks west towards the Israel-Iran situation. It mentions India tried to stay neutral, but apparently that hasn't been very successful.
And the game changer seems to be the direct U.S. involvement, specifically using that JBU-57 bunker buster bomb against Iranian nuclear sites. That's a serious piece of hardware.
A huge escalation. And the article makes this really chilling point that the dreaded N-word, meaning nuclear, is no longer taboo in these discussions.
Precisely. And this feeds directly into the idea that neutrality is becoming, well, less and less of an option for India. The source points out that India's efforts, positioning itself as a leader of the global south, a friend to West Asian nations, it just yielded no dividends when the conflict with Pakistan flared up.
So a bit of a reality check then.
A significant one, it seems. India finds itself facing two hostile nuclear powers nearby, and the article suggests neither China nor Pakistan would have moral compunctions about using nuclear weapons if things got really bad. This also connects to what was discussed at the Shangri-La Dialogue recently, this big security conference. The emphasis there was clearly shifting towards hard power over soft power.
Okay, so given this really complex, perilous environment, what does the article actually recommend India do? What are the concrete steps?
Well, it calls for some major strategic reassessments. First, a really deep dive into that China-Pakistan military link, understanding exactly how integrated China's weapons, like their J-10C jets or the JF-17 fighters, are within Pakistan's forces.
Okay, understand the threat better. What else?
Second, preparing for potentially longer wars. Learning lessons from the UK's defense studies and obviously the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This means looking hard at things like ammunition stockpiles. And crucially, investing in AI and electromagnetic warfare to handle modern threats, drones, glide bombs, that sort of thing.
Right, adapting to new tech.
And finally, it stresses the importance of actually reading and understanding China's own white paper on national security in the new era to really get inside their strategic thinking. The piece also highlights the nuclear imbalance, China having potentially 3 times India's arsenal, and if you combine China and Pakistan, maybe 5 times.
Wow. So the takeaway is a need for a fundamental shift.
Yeah, pretty much. A shift away from traditional non-alignment towards building serious hard power, better intelligence, and rethinking alliances in this much tougher global landscape.
So what does this all mean for you? It's fascinating how these big geopolitical shifts ripple outwards, potentially affecting things much closer to home, like domestic policy, even something like taxation. And our next piece, also from the editorial section, actually explores that kind of link. Let's switch gears now to something impacting daily life right here in India, the Goods and Services Tax, or GST. It's been 8 years since it launched. And, it's often called a landmark reform. It delivered one nation, one tax, simplified things, and definitely boosted revenue, hitting that record 22.08 lakh crore mark recently.
Absolutely, those are the headline successes. But the article digs into the fault lines, particularly where GST intersects with public health, specifically tobacco control. And the numbers here are just stark. Over 3,500 deaths every single day linked to tobacco use in India.
3,500 daily. That's staggering.
It is, and the economic cost is enormous, 2,340 billion annually. That figure completely dwarfs the GST revenue collected from tobacco products, which averages around 551 billion a year. And India, well, it's still the world's second largest tobacco consumer.
It's a huge mismatch. And the article points out something interesting. Before GST, between 2009 and 2017, regular tax hikes actually did reduce tobacco use by about 17%. But since GST came in, No significant tax increases.
That's right. And the consequence is that tobacco products have become more affordable, relatively speaking. The current tax burden is way below what the World Health Organization recommends. They say it should be at least 75% of the retail price. But for things like beedies, it's only around 22%, and even for cigarettes, it's just 54%.
So why the discrepancy? What's the issue with the GST structure itself?
Well, a critical structural issue, according to the source, is GST's heavy reliance on ad valorem taxes based on the product's value. Globally, the consensus is that specific excise taxes, a fixed amount per cigarette or per kilogram of tobacco, are much more effective for health goals. They aren't as easily manipulated by industry pricing strategies.
Ah, okay. So the type of tax matters.
Hugely. And post-GST, the share of that effective specific central excise duty in total tobacco taxes has plummeted. For cigarettes, it went from 54% down to just 8%. For beedies, it dropped from 17% to a mere 1%.
Wow, that's a dramatic drop.
It is. And there's this weird inconsistency, too. Cigarettes, used by only about 15% of tobacco consumers, generate over 80% of the tax revenue. Meanwhile, beedies, which are smoked widely, especially by lower-income groups, are significantly undertaxed and aren't even subject to the GST compensation cess. That cess is a special additional levy.
Right, the compensation cess. And isn't there a concern about that expiring soon?
Yes, that's another urgent point. The cess makes up nearly half the total tax on cigarettes, and it's set to expire in March 2026. If it's removed without replacement, cigarettes could become drastically cheaper, potentially reversing any public health gains.
But what about the industry argument? They always say higher taxes just lead to more illegal cigarettes, right? More illicit trade.
The article tackles that head-on. It calls the industry's claims about illicit trade exaggerated. Independent studies put the figure much lower, somewhere between 2.7% and 6.6% of the market, not the 25% the industry often claims.
So it's not as big a problem as they make out.
Apparently not. And research suggests that things like good governance, strong regulations, and effective enforcement have a much bigger impact on illicit trade than tax levels alone. So the recommendation is this dual strategy. Hike the GST rate on tobacco to its maximum allowed level, which is 40%, and significantly increase those specific excise duties. That way you hit both goals, better public health and stronger government finances.
Okay, let's unpack this further. We see complex challenges in balancing economic policy with health outcomes. What about something even more fundamental to democracy, like ensuring people can actually vote? Our next source, a data point feature, looks at a surprising situation in Bihar. Yeah, this is quite something. The Election Commission of India, the ECI, has launched what this article calls a surprisingly radical revision of the electoral rolls in Bihar, and it describes the move as antithetical to the tradition of voter protection we usually associate with the ECI. The scale is just mind-boggling. A staggering 4.76 crore people, that's over 47 million, are being asked to prove their citizenship within about a month.
It's an enormous number, and who exactly is affected? It's mainly people who weren't on the voter list back in 2003. So basically anyone now age 40 or under. The ECI's initial estimate was around 2.94 crore people needing to provide proof.
Okay, still a lot, but less than 4.76 crore.
Right. But the author of this piece did a more detailed calculation, factoring in things like deaths and migration out of Bihar since 2003, and arrived at that higher figure of 4.74 crore. It just underscores the sheer staggering magnitude of what's being asked here, especially in such a tight time frame.
And what kind of proof do they need? It's one of 11 specific documents, right? But the article asks, how practical is that in a place like Bihar, described as a document-scarce state?
Extremely impractical for a huge number of people. The data laid out is quite stark. For example, birth certificates. Only about 2.8% of people born between 2001 and 2005 in Bihar actually have one. Passports. Only around 2.4% of the entire state population has a passport.
So those aren't realistic options for most.
Not at all. And it turns out the matriculation certificate, basically your Class 10 pass certificate, has effectively become the main eligibility proof for everyone aged 18 to 40. But think about what that means. The article estimates this could potentially disenfranchise around 2.4 crore to 2.6 crore people who had to leave school due to poverty before completing matriculation.
So people are being penalized for poverty, essentially, and for the state's own failure to provide basic documents like birth certificates.
That's the argument being made, yes. The state has shortcomings in issuing these documents, and now citizens are potentially losing their right to vote because of it.
Which leads to the obvious question the article raises. Aadhaar cards are used for so many other things, even linked to caste certificates sometimes. Why not accept Aadhaar here? Or ration cards? Apparently, around 910ths of the Bihar population has Aadhaar.
It's a very pertinent question. Does the ECI suspect it issued voter IDs to millions of non-citizens? That seems to be the unspoken premise, perhaps. But beyond the document issue, there's the sheer logistics. If 4.74 crore people submit applications, that averages out to almost 2 lakh applications per constituency.
Per constituency.
Yes. And there's typically only one electoral registration officer, or ERO, per constituency. Expecting one person to verify nearly 200,000 applications, handle objections, conduct inquiries, all within about 62 days. The article calls it a superhuman task. It seems logistically impossible.
So, what does this all mean for you? When access to a fundamental right like voting becomes tied up in bureaucratic hurdles and potentially inaccessible documents, it raises serious questions about inclusivity and fairness in the democratic process itself. From foundational rights, let's shift focus to something many actively choose for health: kombucha. We found an interesting piece on this in the science section, right? Moving from the complexities of voter rolls to fizzy fermented tea. Kombucha has become incredibly popular, hasn't it? The market in India has exploded, apparently going from $45 million in 2020 to $102 million just this year. And you hear all sorts of claims about it: good for digestion, immunity, metabolism.
There's definitely a lot of buzz, pardon the pun. But the crucial point the source makes early on is that the enthusiasm has outpaced science. Until recently, there just weren't many rigorous studies on humans looking at what kombucha actually does. That's why this new study in the Journal of Nutrition is noteworthy.
Okay, so what did this study involve?
It was conducted in Brazil with 46 healthy adults. About half had obesity, the other half were normal weight. They were given 200 milliliters of lab-prepared kombucha every day for 8 weeks, and researchers tracked changes in their gut microbiome.
And what did they find? Did it change the gut bacteria?
It did, but in a specific way. The overall diversity of microbes didn't change much, but the relative amounts of certain bacteria did shift. This suggests kombucha can positively rebalance the gut ecosystem, as the article puts it.
Okay, so what kind of shifts? Good ones.
Seemingly beneficial ones, yes. In the group with obesity, they saw increases in bacteria like Akkermansiaceae and Prevotalaceae types, linked in other research to better blood sugar control and insulin sensitivity. Both groups also had more Bacteroidota, which are good at digesting complex carbs. And importantly, some less desirable bacteria and fungi like Ruminococcus, Dorea, and certain yeasts actually decreased.
That sounds promising.
Yeah.
So did it improve their health markers then? Blood sugar, inflammation?
Well, that's the interesting part. Despite these microbial shifts, the researchers urged caution because, no, these changes didn't directly translate into improvements in metabolic markers like blood glucose, insulin levels, or inflammatory proteins during the 8-week study.
So the gut bacteria changed, but the body's metabolism didn't, at least not yet.
Exactly. The shifts were described as modest. A metagenomics expert quoted, Vineet K. Sharma, explains that gut microbes do produce substances that can influence metabolism, but this study was likely too short and maybe too small to see those effects clearly. It's more proof of concept. Plus, how your gut responds depends hugely on your diet, your genes, your overall health.
Right.
It's very individual.
That makes sense. And it leads to another key question the article raises. Would we even see the same effects in people in India? Our gut microbiomes are different, aren't they?
They are quite distinct, yes. Research shows Indian gut microbiomes form a clearly separate cluster from Western populations. We tend to have more of certain bacteria, like Prevotella, especially if we eat traditional plant-heavy diets. Since this study showed kombucha increased a related group, Prevotalaceae, maybe it wouldn't cause as big a change here if those microbes are already more common.
So the effect might be different depending on where you live and what you eat.
Precisely. And there's even significant variation within India regionally. So the bottom line is you really can't say no single brand of kombucha can claim to be good for all consumers across geographies. The effects are likely much more nuanced and individual than the marketing sometimes suggests.
So what does this mean for you? When you see health claims about popular products like kombucha, it's worth remembering that the science might still be catching up, and individual results can vary a lot. From products we choose for health, let's now consider the safety of medicines we need, like life-saving cancer drugs. There's a concerning investigation on this in the text section. Yes, shifting now to something really serious. This investigation uncovered issues with bad cancer drugs being shipped to potentially over 100 countries. It highlights the incredibly long, complicated journey these drugs take from raw materials to the factory, through supply chains, finally to the patient, and quality has to be maintained at every single step.
Absolutely. And a huge risk the source emphasizes is contamination during the manufacturing process itself. It's the manufacturer's ultimate responsibility for ensuring sterility. And the level of control needed is intense, think staff disinfection, controlling air movement in clean rooms, sanitizing everything, even pens and paper.
It sounds incredibly rigorous.
It has to be. Because if raw ingredients aren't properly tested, or equipment isn't perfectly clean, or even the water used isn't pure enough, these life-saving medicines can become lethal.
That's a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
So how do some countries like the UK manage to maintain such high standards? They're often seen as a gold standard, right?
They have very stringent systems. For generic drugs, which are a huge part of their system and often imported, every single batch gets tested twice, once where it's made, and again when it arrives in the UK. They check about 20 different quality markers each time. Only specific, qualified experts can sign off on a batch, and their regulatory agency, the MHRA, conducts regular inspections of factories worldwide.
Okay, so multiple layers of checks. What's the situation like in low and middle income countries, the LMICs? The article highlights significant challenges there.
Yes, it's a stark contrast. Many LMICs face limited resources and expertise. The article mentions Nepal, for example, lacking effective ways to test imported drugs. They often struggle to track drugs through the supply chain and might not have the verified experts or the lab facilities needed for quality checks.
So the safeguards just aren't there.
Often, no. And when you combine that with potential corruption issues and porous borders, it creates openings for bad and potentially counterfeit drugs to slip into the healthcare system. The consequences, as the article details, can be horrific. Children dying in Yemen from contaminated chemotherapy drugs, patients getting sick in Saudi Arabia and Colombia from drugs made elsewhere, including India in some cited cases.
It's truly disturbing. What role does the World Health Organization, the WHO, play in trying to prevent this? Are their measures effective?
The WHO does have several tools. There's a rapid alert system, but the critical weakness is that it only catches problems after harm occurs. They also have more proactive things, like the global benchmarking tool to assess national regulators, but worryingly, about 70% of countries are rated at low capacity levels.
So most countries lack strong systems.
That's what the data suggests. The WHO also provides the essential medicines list, pre-qualification programs for certain drugs and manufacturers, good manufacturing practices, GMP guidelines, and a certification scheme called COPP, kind of like a medicine passport. These measures certainly provide some protection, the article concedes, but concludes they simply aren't enough on their own without the kind of rigorous national oversight seen in places like the UK.
So what does this mean for you, the listener? Ensuring the safety of medicines, especially critical ones, is a global challenge with huge disparities. It highlights the importance of strong national regulations and international cooperation. Protecting physical health is vital, but what about protecting cultural identity and knowledge? Our final piece, also from the text section, looks at just that. Okay, for our last deep dive today, let's explore this really interesting clash between culture, commerce, and law. It kicked off recently when the luxury brand Prada showed footwear that looked very clearly inspired by Kolhapuri chapels, those traditional Indian sandals that actually have geographical indication or GI status. This predictably led to accusations of cultural misappropriation.
Right, and to understand why, we need to quickly define geographical indication, or GI. It's a type of intellectual property like a trademark or patent, but it specifically identifies goods that come from a particular place. The key is that their distinctive qualities, characteristics, or reputation are essentially linked to that place of origin.
So it's about linking a product to its geographic roots, like Darjeeling tea, maybe.
Exactly. Darjeeling tea is a classic example. India actually has 658 registered GIs now, things like Chandari saris, Madhubani paintings, and yes, Kolhapuri chapels. GIs aren't just legal tags. They're meant to be a powerful marketing tool, help rural development, boost exports, and really importantly, preserve the cultural knowledge of the communities that make these products.
And ownership is different too, right? It's not like a company owning a brand.
That's a crucial distinction. Unlike trademarks owned by businesses, GIs are considered public property belonging to the producers in that specific region. They generally cannot be assigned, transmitted, or licensed like a private brand can be. Their protection comes from international agreements like the Paris Convention and TRIPS, and India has its own GI Act from 1999.
Okay, so if someone misuses a GI, like maybe Prada potentially did with the Kolhapuri design, what can be done? And what about when it happens internationally?
The registered owners or authorized users of the GI can take legal action against anyone using it in a way that misleads the public about the origin or constitutes unfair competition. But here's the challenge. GI rights are primarily territorial. There's no automatic world or international GI right.
Ah, so protection in India doesn't automatically mean protection everywhere else.
Correct. To get protection abroad, you generally need to have it recognized in the country of origin first, and then specifically apply for and get protection in other countries. It's a country-by-country process, which can be complex and expensive, especially for producer communities.
And this isn't the first time India's traditional products or knowledge have faced this kind of issue internationally, is it?
Not at all. The article reminds us of some past cases. Remember the big fight over basmati rice in the late 90s? A U.S. company, Rice Tech Inc., got a patent on lines derived from basmati, claiming the name. India challenged it successfully, and the scope of the patent and the use of the name basmati were restricted.
Right, I remember that. Any others?
Yes, there was a U.S. patent granted in 1995 on using turmeric for wound healing, something known in India for centuries. That patent was revoked after India provided evidence of prior traditional knowledge. Same thing happened with a European patent on a neem-based fungicide in 2000, revoked because the use was already established in India.
So India has successfully fought these battles before by proving prior traditional knowledge. What are the suggestions now to maybe prevent these situations from happening in the first place?
Well, one idea is to expand India's traditional knowledge digital library, the TKDL, to include a much wider range of grassroots cultural expressions, not just codified medical systems. Another suggestion is creating a kind of searchable database that global brands could use for due diligence before they launch a product. The hope is this could foster genuine collaboration with the communities holding the rights rather than leading to appropriation.
So what does this mean for you? It raises a fundamental question in our globalized world. How do we best protect cultural heritage and traditional knowledge, ensuring that local communities benefit and their identity is respected while still allowing for inspiration and innovation? It's a delicate balance. Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you're the first to hear the next one. You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description. We are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.